Bonjour tout le monde, welcome to this video on le futur simple or the simple future tense. Now believe it or not, this is not the simplest way of expressing the future in French. Le futur proche or the near future tense is much simpler, and I suggest that you learn that before moving on to the simple future. In fact, the word simple in simple future refers to the fact that this tense doesn't use any auxiliary verbs. Instead, it relies on stems and endings. Naturally, this means that we have some memorization to do, but don't worry, it's not too difficult. Using the simple future is, well, pretty simple. Of course, we use it to talk about future actions. In English, we might say something like, I will play. And generally, if you have will in an English sentence, you can be sure that you'll be using the future tense in French. I do, however, want to talk to you about tense balancing. This sounds more confusing than it is. All it means is that sometimes in French, we'll use the future tense when English uses the present. For example, in a sentence like, when I play golf, I will win. In English, we have present tense, future tense. In French, we'd have future tense, future tense. So you'd say, quand je jouerai au golf, je gagnerai, which is literally when I will play golf, I will win. But we'll look at that in more detail in a moment. First, let's look at the conjugations, which for regular verbs at least are very simple. We simply take the infinitive and then put the future ending on the end. With irregular verbs, we don't always use the infinitive, but you can learn about that in more detail in my irregular verb videos. In this video, we'll just focus on regular verbs. The good thing about the future endings, though, is that they are completely consistent. They don't depend on whether the verb is er, ir, or re, and they should seem quite familiar to you. Let's have a look at them. Je is ai, tu is as, il, elle, on is just a, nous is ons, vous is ez, and il, elle is ont. Now, if these do seem familiar to you, that's because this is almost exactly the same as the present tense conjugation of avoir. J'ai, tu as, il, elle, on a, ils, elles ont. The only exception is with nous and vous, where we don't have avant, ave, but just on, a. So it's very similar anyway. So if you're ever struggling to remember your future tense endings, think avoir. So now let's do some examples, starting with the usual jouer, which means to play. Our stem is just the infinitive, and to that we'll add the endings. So we have je jouerai, tu joueras, il, elle, on jouera, nous jouerons, vous jouerez, and ils, elles joueront. Okay, very simple. Finir, regular IR verb meaning to finish. We have je finirai, tu finiras, il, elle, on finira, nous finirons, vous finirez, and ils, elles finiront. And finally, attendre. The one thing I need to point out is that with RE verbs, you need to remove the E before adding any endings. Other than that, everything else is the same. We have j'attendrai, tu attendras, il, elle, on attendra, nous attendrons, vous attendrez, and ils, elles attendront. Very simple. The one important thing to remember is that r sound, because that can be the difference between one tense and another. So remember, with the future, you always need a nice r sound before your ending. So the conjugation is very simple, but now let's talk about that situation before when I was saying sometimes in French use the future when English uses the present. Let's have a look at this sentence. I will buy a car when I have enough money. Here we have future tense, I will buy, and then present tense, I have. Now, French looks at this and says, well, that's a little bit strange. Okay, you haven't bought a car yet, so therefore you're using the future, but you don't have the money yet, so why are you using the present? Surely that suggests that you have the money now. So French says, actually, because neither event has happened yet, we're going to use the future tense in both. So what we actually say is, j'achèterai une voiture quand j'aurai assez d'argent. Now, j'aurai is irregular. It's the future tense of avoir, but all you need to know at the minute is that it's using the future tense. And this is often the case when we have the word when in French. When something happens in the future, something else will happen. And French says, well, they're both in the future, therefore we'll use the future tense for both. We have a similar situation with the expression as soon as. For example, I will call you as soon as I get home. Again, in English we have an imbalance. We have future, then present. French says no, these actions have not happened yet, therefore they both need to be in the future. So we say, je t'appellerai dès que means as soon as, Je rentrerai chez moi. Okay, I will call you as soon as I will get home. Now I've put at the top there, le français est logique. French is logical. Now this doesn't necessarily help because of course if your native language is English, what you know, I will call you as soon as I get home, for example, that is normal. Okay, but if you take a step back and compare English and French, actually you realize that the French method is a little bit more logical. Now there is one other case where you might think that we need future again. Let's have a look. I will buy a car if I have enough money. Again, you might think, well, neither of these events has happened yet, therefore we need to use the future. But the word if changes everything. If is completely hypothetical. We don't know that in the future I will have enough money. So we can't use the future tense. We can only use the future when we're sure that it will happen. So now French says, okay, if we use if, we can use present tense. J'achèterai une voiture si j'ai assez d'argent. To use the future here would seem strange because the word if, in French, si, removes all certainty of it happening. If this is all a bit much for you, here's something that might help you a little bit. In everyday common spoken French, people will break that rule. They'll say things like j'achèterai une voiture quand j'ai assez d'argent. That's fine in colloquial French. If, however, you're studying for an exam or you're going to be doing some official writing in France for work, then it's good practice to get it right and follow the correct method. And that is it. Hopefully this video has helped you. If you want to look at some other verby things, then go to my verb playlist. It is there for your very convenience. And if you're not sure where to go to next in terms of tenses, I would suggest learning the conditional tense. Once you've done the future, and also if you've done the imperfect as well, the conditional is very, very, very easy, so you shouldn't have too much problem with that. Of course, it's always a good idea to look at your irregular verbs as well, because you'll use those very, very often. If you have any questions, of course, you're welcome to ask. And until next time, à bientôt.